There's no toilets in the cell, but you have a hole in the floor. And so on the second occasion when they caught him with the origami, they decided to stick his head down the toilet bowl or down the hole, start flushing it, and the kid died. I applied to a bank called Coutts and Company at 440 Strand, which is actually the Queen's Bank. That's where the royal family, they've got a branch called Buckingham, which is where they all keep their money, and they've got various accounts. Like bizarre stuff, they've got accounts for the corgis and all that sort of stuff. It's just weird.
So how soon before it hit $500 million?
That would have been late on. I think by the end of '94, I probably had 400 million from me. The Treasury Department. This is a small bank, Sean. It was only worth £250 million. That was the capital base. So they're borrowing the money. They're borrowing it. Yeah, they're borrowing it from Barclays. They're borrowing it from Citibank to give it to me in Singapore. And they're not asking, and they're not. You used the word earlier, diligence. Was there any diligence done about my trading? Never. They're giving me 400 million. The bank's only worth 250 million. Right, the legal limit you could lend to a subsidiary is 20% of the bank's capital, so 50 million. So the Bank of England are allowing this to happen. All of the regulators around the world are allowing this to happen. You'd often wake up with a cockroach next to you, but they weren't really cleaned, these cells. They're passed down from inmate to inmate without any cleaning going on. So there were no windows. So they turned the light on at night and they turned it off during the day. There was no way, you didn't know how time was passing. You used to get your food through a cat flap in the door. So you just get your food thrown through there. In the morning they used to have to count the inmates, so you knew that was about 8 o'clock. That's when that happened. In the evening at 7 o'clock they used to go around and do a muster as well. So you kind of knew 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock at night. The rest of it was just a day. So what I used to do is so it's 6 foot in length. I just used to walk up and down, and 850 times was an hour.
Unbelievable. I'm sat here with Nick Leeson. His movie, it was like the original Wolf of Wall Street. This came out in the late 1980s when I was just getting into the stock market. I watched the movie with my dad, completely blown away. Previously, I'd been amazed by the profits traders had made. But in Nick's case, he lost almost £1 billion for the bank. Queen Elizabeth's Bank was the headline. That's over $1 billion, which was a world record at the time. Yep. Ewan McGregor, if you watch the movie, he looks really young in it. It's one of his first movies. He was in Star Wars, of course, but I think this was a main role for him. And I have thought about Nick over the years, because Nick's incarceration journey includes Germany, Singapore. And before we get into the backstory of what led to his downfall and incarceration, I'm going to ask Nick just to take us into the Singapore prison briefly and just drop some stories so you know what's coming later on. But huge thank you for coming on, man, and flying over from Ireland as well. Oh, and Nick starting his own podcast. Link will be in description box. Please subscribe.
Yep.
And it's going to be centered around financial crime as the main theme, but we'll get to that later on when what he's doing now. But a huge thank you for coming on, man.
No, looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me. It's I'm looking forward to this. Some stories and some shared experiences, I'm sure, as well, Sean. But Singapore prison. It was tough. You're locked up 23 hours a day. Everybody else is a triad gang member, so you're always trying to work out how to get by. There's a very different Asian way of surviving. They call it face, so you have to give everybody face and know how to talk to people, and you can't make fun of people other than one-on-one where nobody else is listening. if one of their other gang members is there and you start taking the mick out of them, there's a fight coming down the way. So, it's a maximum security prison. Gurkhas patrolling the walls with guns. So I don't think anybody's ever tried to escape from one of those sort of prisons. But you feel safe, but there's always an undercurrent of violence. When there is violence, it's really aggressive, really violent, really quick. It's put down equally as quickly by the guards. There's riot guards that are always on hand to do that. I remember arriving and I was there for about a week on remote. Like it was all fairly choreographed at the time. I went into a place called Tanamera Prison that you don't normally have remand prisoners on. So they'd put a few people in there on remand. I was there for a week. I went into a cell that an English guy had just prior to me, who'd cut up a few bodies in Singapore, put them into the Singapore River, and he was sentenced to death. So he was my previous previous occupier of the cell that I was going into. So I probably saw him once during that period. He was, I think his case was from March of 95. I arrived back into Tanamera Prison early December 95. And then he was executed in March of 96. So they don't mess about in Singapore. If you're on death row, it's really, really quick. Your pictures in the newspapers. So I went into his cell at first. It's a very strict regimental type prison. They still have corporal punishment inside. So they, every week there'll be people who are getting the rattan, which is 100 pieces of bamboo tied together. They put you on a big wooden tress. Obviously there's a leather piece that they put around the just above your bum sort of area to protect your liver and your kidneys, just in case they're off target when they're hitting you. Obviously they strip you down and then they hit you with this thing, and it's the guy with the biggest muscles that does it. Your backside is ripped to pieces, and you can get anywhere between inside the prison. So just if you do something wrong inside the prison, you can get 6 strokes of the rattan. If you tattoo yourself or you tattoo somebody else, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 strikes for that. But you might get 6 to 12 strokes awarded by the court, and then the prison can give you up to another 6 more as well. So 12 strokes, the pain is going to knock you out. And then you've got the whole issue of how do you stop the bleeding, which is tough. One of my cellmates one time had 6 strokes, and the first thing that they do, obviously it's Singapore, so it's hot, so you get an hour outside, you go and sit on the floor and you try to cauterize it that way. There's not a great deal of help from the medical people within the prison.
What happened to the guy with the origami?
The origami story, that was there was a remand prison, right? I was never in it, but so there's 2 stories there on that remand prison one. There was one young Chinese guy. You have nothing in the cells, absolutely nothing, right? So there's 4 walls, you sleep on the floor, and you probably have a spoon and a small piece of towel to dry yourself if you manage to get a shower as well. But this young lad, he found a piece of paper, or he got himself a piece of paper, and he decided to make an origami figure. So the guards came in the next day. They caught him with this origami piece of paper, give him a bit of a going over, and took the piece of paper away and thought that was it. The next day he's got another piece of paper, does it again. They don't like that, so there's no toilets in the cell, but you have a hole in the floor, which is where you go to the toilet, obviously, and where you shower. And so on the second occasion when they caught him with the origami, they decided to stick his head down the toilet bowl or down the hole, start flushing it, and the kid died. So just before so there used to be, if you listen to the other inmates, there used to be a lot of guard on inmate violence. But but when I arrived, these guys had been put on trial. So the guards had been on trial. One of them got 6 years, one of them got 8 years, and then the guy who was in charge of that little group of guards, he got 10 years. So they were all in the same prison that I was in. So it's true. You're seeing them every day. Obviously, they're they're not kept apart, but there's people watching that they're okay. But I didn't really see any violence against them. But the prison I was in, like I said, it was maximum security. It was fairly new, CCTV cameras everywhere. There weren't too many blind spots. There were one or two, but. The other story from that remand prison, this was exactly the same time. So you've got the English guy who was hung probably 3 or 4 months after I arrived back in Singapore. The other big case at the time that got lots of international attention is there was a 16-year-old American kid keyed a few cars, and you were talking to me about your car being keyed on the way here, but he keyed a few cars around a certain area of Singapore, got caught. They took him to trial. He got 6 months in prison, and he got 4 strokes of the Rotan. So Bill Clinton, who was the president of the US at the time, stepped in and asked them to commute it, which they wouldn't do. So he spent his time in that remand prison. He never came to the prison that I was in, but I do think that, or the story that used to go round the prison was that they reduced the number of strokes and they didn't hit him that hard. So I don't know where the kid is now, but maybe he didn't get the full weight of the Rotan.
Wow. So that's a 10-minute snippet of where we're going, folks, but we're going to go back to the beginning now and find out how the hell do you lose over $1 billion for the Queen's Bank and end up incarcerated like this. Was it Watford you grew up in?
Yeah, I come from Watford originally, so I grew up on a council estate in Watford. My dad was a plasterer. My mum did a bit of nursing type care type work, and was just normal kid really. Was always looking to be successful. I think that was the thing that was my main driver throughout those years. It was the thing that probably drove my mum on as well. She always wanted me to do better than she had. It's that classic working class example where your parents want you to have a little bit more than they had. Maybe move up from working class to middle class or however it goes. But I was driven and I wanted to be successful. And, I was very successful at school, little bit of an overachiever up until about the age of 13, 14. When I was at senior school, it wouldn't be the roughest area in the world that I grew up in, but it wouldn't be the safest either. Going to school every day, we used to have to go past a couple of other senior schools. There'd always be a bit of trouble. That was always around. I think I would describe it as a normal childhood. I don't think there was anything lurking in the background at that time that meant I was going to lose a load of money in the markets and cause the collapse of a bank. But
so you hadn't been introduced to the stock market at a young age?
No, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have known what it was. Yeah. Growing up in those sort of environments, I think my mum always, and I joke about this. She always wanted me to have a stable career. She wanted me to have more money than she had, and those were the targets, if you like. And going back, and this is probably back even into the 80s. I started to work in the city in 1985. So, my mum would have been thinking, it'd be great if it get a job for life. That was kind of the phrase, wasn't it? And so if I got a job in a bank or a law firm or an accountancy firm, that was kind of it. You were made, coming from that working class environment, if you like. And unfortunately, I touched on them all in one way or another, and definitely not in the way that she would have wanted me to. I worked in a bank, I was prosecuted, and it was fraud. So, I struck the 3 areas that she wanted me to, but not in the way that she wanted.
So where were you at when you finished your education?
At the age of so probably the age of 17, 18, I was fairly switched on with maths and stuff like that. My maths teacher got ill. He was the deputy head of the school that I used to go to, which was, it was an old, it was a school from London, from the East End of London, that moved, like a grammar school from the East End of London, that relocated to Hertfordshire. It was only the second year that they'd actually been in Hertfordshire. They're one of the best schools around that area, but they probably made do with a few people in those first couple of years. But like I said, it was a bit of an overachiever. The maths teacher got ill, so we had all these substitute teachers that used to come in. And I just took the opportunity and I didn't bother going to the lessons. I thought I'd be able to catch up, and I failed my maths A-level. So, I couldn't catch up, and I applied for a job. The plan was to go to university. That was definitely the plan. So I was doing 3 A-levels at the time. I think I was doing English literature, history, and maths. I got the other two. I failed the maths one. I applied to a bank called Coutts and Company at 440 Strand, which is actually the Queen's Bank. That's where the royal family. They've got a branch called Buckingham, which is where they all keep their money, and they've got various accounts. Like bizarre stuff. They've got accounts for the corgis and all that sort of stuff. It's just weird. And there's a part of it called Coutts Finance, where all the money goes on deposit every night. So they have to phone in from Buckingham and tell you how much money is going on deposit and stuff like that. But I got offered a job. It was even difficult to get an interview, right? But for some reason, I got an interview. There's probably 50 people who applied from my school. I got an interview, and that was my first sort of experience, not even of the stock market. This was just experience of banking and private banking. It was a different world. It was different people. If you didn't have £1 million in the bank, you didn't have an account at Coutts. We used to have some real funny stories. There were lots of very famous people who banked there. I remember one of the famous stories that I was told about at the time. Spike Milligan, you remember Spike Milligan, comedian, very eccentric character. He used to be a customer of the bank, and they used to have these big, sort of, not banquets, but really nice dinners that they'd invite some of their best clients to. And so Spike Milligan was invited one time, and he sat under the dinner table throughout the whole dinner. Didn't converse with anybody else, and then when he was leaving, he said to them the next time, just put the money in my bank account. I don't want to come. I'll just put, don't forget me, type of thing. But yeah,
what other celebrities?
Well, it was more people that were very, 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 very wealthy in the UK. There was lots of people. I mean, a Coutts checkbook, it's fairly fancy. And if this will make you laugh, but if you got a Coutts checkbook out, you didn't, like you used to have a bank guarantee card. The shops would say, "Oh no, you don't have to worry with the bank guarantee card." But as staff members of the bank, we all had a Coutts bank account as well. So it was great. You'd go around, there was a branch called St Giles, which is the staff branch. So if you see somebody with a Coutts check, you immediately think this person's loaded until you see the St Giles part, and then they're just a staff member. But just like any bank, I suppose, if you've got customers that are worth a lot of money, when things go wrong for those people, we used to bounce Coutts checks, and normally it's a lot of money that you're bouncing them for when they do. So, but it was a great time. That was my entry into the City of London, I suppose. I worked at 15 Lombard Street, which was right in the heart of the city. I didn't choose 15 Lombard Street. Somebody at Coutts decided that's where I was going to start, and then you're slap bang in the centre of the stock market, really, and all of that. Everywhere's a bank. You go back into Lombard Street now, and there's restaurants and there's nightclubs and God knows whatever else. But at the time, it was just wall to wall bank, and it was the Big Bang era. So it was a process of deregulation, lots of new banks coming into the city, and lots of opportunities for kids like me. I suppose came from the other side of the other side of the town, if you like.
Know what that means? Ooh, I've been hearing that a lot lately. That's what I hear when we make another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're selling Pokemon cards or hoodies, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so you can successfully grow your business. Covering all your sales channels from a shop-front ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform. Shopify even gets you selling across social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Full of the industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth, Shopify gives you complete control over your business and your brand without learning new skills in design or coding. And thanks to award-winning help and with an extensive business course library, Shopify is ready to support your success every step of the way. What's lovely about Shopify is that no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify will be there to empower you with the confidence and control to take your business to the next level. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial, period, at shopify.co.uk/Sean, SHAUN, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/Sean to take your business to the next level today. Shopify.co.uk/Sean. Link in description box if you're watching this on YouTube. Thanks for supporting our sponsor. Back to the podcast. Cheers.
And it was really this oasis of opportunity.
Which is an interesting point because I applied to be an investment analyst at several of those banks. And I did get some job interviews. And coming from a working class town, when I'm sat there about to go in for the interview and speaking to the other lads, I've just flown in from Switzerland for the interview kind of thing. How did you integrate into that?
It's probably been. I think if I look at my life in a nutshell, Sean, I think the thing that I've always found easiest to do, and the thing that I think has got me into places that have been of great benefit to me, but have also been of great issue to me, is that I'm very socially adept, right? So I can, my mates were all working on building sites. They were postmen, they were delivering letters, but they were my mates, and I loved them. And those were the people that were really the backbone of my life, if you like. And I still see them today, and we still have the same sort of talk. And but I was working in the city, and for me, the city was just a job of work, right? My mates were at home, and they were the guys that I was going to go out with and socialise and have fun with, and probably have a bit of a scrap with every now and again. But Monday to Friday, I was in the city, and I had to get on with these people, because if I wanted to succeed, I had to speak to Quentin and Tarquin, and maybe go and play Crown Green bowling with them on a Thursday evening, which we don't have Crown Green bowling in Watford, certainly not on the council estate I came from. So, it was two different worlds. And, I was very socially adept and able to work both of them. Sometimes when I say that, I think it makes me sound a little bit psychotic, but that wasn't the case. I kind of...
You're a chameleon.
I wanted to succeed. And the way to succeed is... I could sit with these people, and they'd all think we were best mates, but I just couldn't wait to get away from them. That was great 9 to 5, but you're never going to be my pal. My pals are back home in Watford, and these are people that have grown up, and I know and I understand, and they're the same as me. Whereas you're not really, like you said, they came from Switzerland, or they went to different schools, and there was a couple of people that kind of transgressed that over the years, but not too many. And they would have been, closer to centre rather than one of the outliers. So, I can count on probably, I was going to say one hand, but that may be too many. But, I can certainly count on less than one hand the number of people that would have stayed in touch from that time, that you would have wanted to stay in touch with. Most of the guys that would be within that number are people who worked on the open outcry floors, and they were kind of, you know, they were always characterised as barrow boys, and, you know, a bit different from everybody else who worked in the city, but they were, you know, they were more like you. Do you know what I mean?
Before we get to them, what was your entry level position, and how did you rise up the ranks?
So at Coutts, everybody starts in, I can't even remember what the area was called now, but you're going through that. Like checks would, like in the modern day and age, like checks are things that people don't understand anymore. But we would have to process checks. So you'd be keying in the checks through the different accounts, and, you know, just basic admin stuff. You know, you then look at, so we'd bounce checks as well. And you know, the bouncing of the checks would be done by somebody who was a little bit more senior. So it was kind of an operations type role, but fairly, like, very menial, and very entry level type of stuff. Can't think of anything there that was, but it was a good environment, and you know, everybody got along. We had a laugh. We had to wear tails. So, you know, like things that, and a waistcoat like yourself, so you would have fitted in. You had to be clean shaven. You weren't allowed to, you weren't allowed to grow a beard or anything like that. That was the rules. And then more often than not, you'd forget to take the tails off when you were going out for a beer at lunchtime, and you'd look a complete prat in the bar that you went to. But everybody knew that you worked. Everybody knew that you worked for Coutts at that time. But yeah, there was plenty of drinking, lunchtime drinking. Going back and probably not operating at the same speed in the afternoon. But yeah, no, it was an enjoyable time. And as I said, it was, you know, there was lots of opportunity because there was lots of banks opening up at that time.
Yeah, I did a summer job at Barclays, and I think it was like putting stamps on envelopes and filing checks and things like that. So how did you progress then? What was your...
Well, I was doing well at Coutts. I got on well with everybody, and started to work my way through those operational type roles. Then you move into a loan department where people are looking for loans. I did a bit of work at a part of the firm which was called Coutts Finance, which was involved in some of those loans. But I was moving on fairly quickly. You know, when you used to get off at the tube at bank, used to get these magazines. I think they were called Time Out, and they used to have a few short stories in them. But during that particular period, sort of 85 to 87, they were just inundated with jobs because there were banks looking for people all of the time. So you could just, as you got off the tube or as you were on your way home, you'd look through and there'd be, you know, a job that was fairly similar to yours that was offering maybe 3 or 4 grand more, but it was for Moscow Narodny Bank or somebody strange that you'd never heard of before. And then, you know, I responded to one of those, and I went to work for Morgan Stanley, which is one of the biggest American investment banks. That was just down the road in what was the old CU building, just opposite the Lloyd's building where all the insurance brokers are.
What year was that?
So I left school in 85, so I probably went to Morgan Stanley in 87.
This is about
Big Bang era.
Was that the year Yoppie became part of our lexicon?
Yeah, probably. I mean, yeah, everybody was walking around with those filer faxes, putting them down on the bar, and it's always that famous one with Del Boy in Only Fools and Horses when he's going around with it. It was a bit like that, I suppose. But yeah, no, plenty of yuppies, and yeah, like I said, like Morgan Stanley was good fun as well. I worked in the Eurobond area for Morgan Stanley for a bit. So that was around the time that junk bonds were coming to the fore.
Michael Milken.
Yeah, Michael Milken, another reformed character, is doing very well for himself these days. So Drexel, Burnham, Lambert and all that sort of stuff. So I was in Eurobonds for about a year at Morgan Stanley. Then I moved over to start to specialise in futures and options, in settlements at first. Spent a bit of time in an area called liability management, which was looking after all the bank's finances during that period. That was in the West End. During that period, I very famously got into a bit of an altercation in a nightclub in St Albans. Broke my jaw, broke my nose, and
What was the build up to that?
I was just lads out on a day after playing football. Bit of hijinks that didn't really go as expected, and
When you say hijinks, what do you mean?
I think, well, it certainly wouldn't be appropriate these days, Sean. I think somebody got their cock out and was showing it around the. We're allowed to use that word, are we?
Yeah, you're fine. Keep going. You're fine. Yep, keep going.
They started showing it around the nightclub, and a few people got a bit upset by that. And my mates were always, if there was a fight to be had, they were always available. And it just descended into a little bit of chaos. I was on one side of the room, the other guys were on the other room. I got hit by a chair and woke up in hospital. I couldn't tell you anything more about it because I was unconscious as soon as I was hit by the chair. So I broke my jaw. I was wired up. For 5 weeks. I was answering the phone at Morgan Stanley, going, "Hello, can I help you?"
So was it one of
I told him it was a car crash. I told him I was in a car crash.
Was it one of your mates who was exhibiting his Prince William, or was it the other side with the church?
I know, it was one of my mates.
It was one of your mates. Okay. You told him it was you're in a car crash.
I told him I was in a car crash. Yeah, I had to drink tomato soup for 5 weeks. Not the nicest time. So
let me just put a few things in layman's terms for the public as well, because I was the options manager for my branch in America. So Nick's talked about going from grunt work now to heavyweight trading in derivatives, which are geared instruments. So if an underlying security moves 10%, for example, these instruments can move hundreds of percent. Yeah. Or conversely, if the underlying instrument goes down a little bit, these instruments can be wiped out completely. So he's entered the waters of risky trading, geared risky trading, which is going to be pertinent to where this story is going, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great description that you've given there. I mean, Warren Buffett used to describe them as weapons of mass destruction, and that's what they are. They're hedging instruments primarily, right? So, and that's if you use them correctly. But the other side of it is that they're highly speculative. They're highly geared. They can be highly profitable, and they can be, highly loss making as well. And that was the world that I was getting into, or starting to get into, at Morgan Stanley. And I then fell out of love with the people at Morgan Stanley just because I wanted to get onto the trading floor. For me, it was everybody's aspiration at the time. If you could get there, that wasn't quite the pinnacle, but it was, you were moving in the right direction. The guy who ran the London traded options market at Morgan Stanley at the time, I got quite pally with. I used to look after his book when I was working in the settlements area at Morgan Stanley, and he had an opportunity to take a junior onto the London traded options floor. So he asked me if I'd like that, and I grabbed that with both hands. The unfortunate part was that I was too good at the other job that they didn't want to let me go straight away. So, I was a bit disgruntled, and I was always like that. I was always confident of my own ability. I'd often walk into offices that I worked in, and I'd say, look, I want to do this. If you won't let me do it, then I'm going to leave. And more often than not, they fought to keep me there. Stupid, weren't they, when you look at the end of the story? But yeah, no, they'd always fight to keep me. That was how I ended up in Singapore as well. But I was always very, very confident of my own ability.
Going back to the trading floor briefly, then. So you were on the trading floor.
No, I wasn't at Morgan Stanley.
Didn't make it.
No, that all happened. So they stopped that short. They wouldn't let me go straight away. So eventually I said, no, I'm going. And then I was headhunted to Barings, which was back in where was it? I think it was EC1. It was in Portsoken Street. It may have been E1, but just on the edge of the city. They were building out their futures and options area, principally or primarily Japanese futures and options, which I had a lot of experience of. Barings were renowned for paying big bonuses. Obviously, it was an English bank. And I just wanted the opportunity, and more than anything else, Sean, at that time, I wanted the opportunity to get to the trading floor. And they said that was a possibility. I got stuck there for a period of about 6 or 7 months, and then I went to see the guy who employed me, Ian Martin. He was one of the original directors of Barings Securities, which is an offshoot of Baring Brothers. And I said, look, Ian, I'm not happy with this. I'm not getting to the trading floor quick enough. I'm going to leave. What can you do? And he said, look, I've got the perfect opportunity for you. It's in Sydney, Australia. You can go and work on the futures exchange in Sydney, but it's going to be another month or two. In the meantime, we've got an issue out in Hong Kong. Would you go out to Hong Kong and do a bit of work for us out there? So I'd been back and forth to Japan a few times with Morgan Stanley and with Barings. So I was used to travelling with them, and I grabbed the opportunity to move out to Hong Kong. They had a big equity settlement problem. They were buying a lot of equities. They weren't getting the money for them down in Indonesia. It was all being booked out of Hong Kong. So I spent about a month in Hong Kong and then moved down to Jakarta.
All right. So before we get into that, let's set the table a bit more about Barings, the history of the bank. I mean, how posh was that compared to Coutts, and who were the clients?
The client base is probably similar to Coutts.
Royal people.
Yeah, a lot of royal people. I mean, the stories always that went around after the collapse were that it was the Queen's Bank. The Queen was probably a customer. There were probably various members of the royal family that were customers. I can't deny or confirm that, to be honest with you. But very wealthy people. There are lots of big You used to get a lot of big organisers, like George Soros was a customer, one of the biggest ever financiers. So, I used to look after Soros's investment accounts when I was working in Singapore. And from an execution perspective, they'd do their own. So he had a fund called Quantum. So, Soros was behind that. You'd have a lot of the, like the investment parts of big countries. So, like the Dubai government, the Qataris, those sort of that would be the big ticket customer business that was going through Barings at that time.
And how old was the bank?
So Baring Brothers was 233 years old. Barings Securities, which is the part that I worked for, was only 10 years old. 10 years old at the time of the collapse. So I went there in 1990. Barings Securities was only formed in 1985. But it was the big go-getting part of the bank that was making all of the money at the time. So a lot of it out in Southeast Asia.
So you derailed a bank that was 233 years old and had the Queen, royal family members, and George Soros as customers.
I came here to feel good about myself.
Well, the viewers are going to love that, because I read Soros's book back then when I was a kid about his theory of whatever quantum.
The story
was.
The story goes right, and again, I can't verify this for you, but the story goes that Soros tried to get in his early days tried to get a job at Barings, and they refused him.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, the viewers are going to be cheering that you collapsed the bank that George Soros was banking through, because our viewers, I worshipped Soros when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
But now, after doing all the research and seeing, the influence and certain things, the viewers, there's a lot of conspiracies about him, let's just say. I'll leave it at that. But the viewers are going to be delighted that was his bank that took a hit. I guarantee it. I'm sorry. So you're right. You're in Asia now, in the timeline. Yeah. And how's life in Asia?
Crazy. Like I'm 21, 22 in Jakarta and living my best life. It's a dangerous place. We used to have a bodyguard that used to pick us up in the morning from the hotel, take us directly to work, and then pick us up afterwards, take us back to the hotel. He had a gun. And he would be with us everywhere. And then, like there was 3 or 4 of us who were around the same sort of age. Eventually, we wanted to venture out on our own. And so we started to do that. And, you really get into the real seedy, so, like it's seedy anyway. Unfortunately, Jakarta at the time, it's changed a lot over the years. We'd spend some time going down to Bali and some of the other islands as well. But Jakarta was dangerous. I mean, the first thing we got told when we were arriving there was you can't put your hand out of the window in the car because somebody, if they see a ring, they will cut your finger off. You've got to be very, very careful where you go to. And we were going around like in the most bizarre circumstances. It was all script trading, right? So if you bought an equity, it wasn't an online transaction that you were doing. You'd get a piece of paper for every share that you bought or every 10 shares that you bought. So these transactions were going on at the stock exchange in Jakarta. We were using HSBC as our bank. That everybody would deliver their shares to HSBC. They would pay them the money, and then we would get the shares and we'd try to deliver them to our customer, who may be in Denmark or they might be in Holland or somewhere like that. But when we were trying to deliver them, you used to have there used to be a signature from the buyer, a signature from the seller on the broker side, and there would also be a stamp on it as well. So when we were getting the documents, you'd often find that it was missing the signature, it didn't have the stamp on it. So we had to go round the various different brokers and try to get those signatures. So these would be in the arse end of Jakarta. It'd be a broker that you'd never heard of. And you'd be going down these rooms with Tino, who was the driver. You'd be going down these roads with Tino, who was the driver, and you'd be scared to get out of the car because these were all bearer certificates. Not that too many people in Jakarta had them, but they were bearer certificates. So if you had the 2 signatures on it, you could basically turn that in for cash. So we had, the old legal attaché cases, quite big square ones. We'd have those full of bearer certificates, and it would be handcuffed to our wrist as we were going around these different places. And there were a few times that people would come past on motorbikes and try and pull it off your hand as well. Just outside the stock exchange, that used to happen more often than not. But it was a dangerous time, but it was an exciting time. It was a different type of life. We were living on expenses. We used to get our expenses paid once a month. I can't remember what we used to get. Say it was 200,000 rupiah at the time they used to have in Jakarta. But it'd be the pile of money would be that big, right? You couldn't get it into 8 or 10 different pockets. The pile of money was that big, and you'd be going out and you'd be dining in the best places, spending a lot of money on alcohol and going to Bali at the weekends and stuff like that. It was great. Buying myself golf clubs and all sorts.
Do you miss that?
No, it was the time of my life that probably got me in more trouble than it should have done at the time. And all of it kind of then. We didn't even have visas when we were working there. We used to have to go to Singapore every 2 months because we'd only have or 2 or 3 months because we'd only have a 90-day visit visa. And then we'd have to go over to Singapore for a couple of days and come back in and get another stamp on our passport. And the government authorities, they raided a couple of the offices during that time, and people were kicked out. Barings got a little bit worried about the number of people that we had in Jakarta, so they sent everybody else home, and I was left there on my own for a short period of time.
Where did you go next?
From Jakarta, I came back to London. I'd obviously made a bit of a name for myself, or I'd improved upon my name during that period. Did a bit of work in business development. So from London, it was a new department that they'd just set up. So I was travelling a lot, setting up offices in Germany. And then Singapore popped up as a location where they wanted to upgrade their membership. And it combined a love of Asia and the Asian lifestyle, the warm weather, everything else. and a background in futures and options. So for me, it was the ideal opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands. And everybody else agreed that it would be a good move for me, and that I was the right person for the job. Everybody messed up there, didn't they? But because it went wrong fairly quickly when I got out to Singapore,
So how much were you initially authorised to trade?
Initially, nothing. It was setting up the operation. So we were doing, we were order filling. So we were broking for other people. So most of the decision making was in Japan. So we had an arbitrage desk, and we had an equity trading desk, and they would do some order execution through Singapore. The main market was Japan, right? Singapore was just an offshoot. It had a similar product. It traded the Nikkei 225. So if you didn't have liquidity in Osaka or in Tokyo, that business could shift through to Singapore, and that's what happened during that period. And it happened fairly quickly. Markets were falling, so there were circuit breakers kicking in Japan, and a lot of the business was coming through Singapore, and Singapore wasn't ready for it. It was a very immature market, didn't have a lot of people with a lot of expertise, and with hindsight, not at the time, but with hindsight, that kind of all fell into place for what was about to happen. Not that it was in any way planned that way, but when you look back at it, and you're looking at levels of incompetence and negligence that are just absurd, right? Absolutely absurd in an industry that everybody believes is complex and populated by the brightest people. The level of stupidity is just astounding, and that includes me. I'm not trying to get away from it myself, but it's just bonkers. Like, everybody thinks I was a scapegoat. I wasn't a scapegoat. I did it all on my own. I took every single trade that during that period that led to the collapse of the bank. Just everybody around me was, I don't know if they were switched off, they were looking the other way, or they were just plain stupid.
Let's go over this trade slowly then. How do you get authorised in the beginning to trade with X amount of money? Who authorises that? And what due diligence do they do on your skill set to authorise that?
It could be some quick answers to that. Well, obviously, it's not like working in, not that I work in an organisation these days, but you've got policies, you've got procedures, you've got systems, and probably people are working through these rule books of what you do on day one, and then what do you do after you've done the first part of that, and this is how your life and your business works within it. Everything at the time, certainly at Barings Securities, was you learn on your feet, right? The guy next to you is the guy who's teaching you what to do, and he's passing down his experience and his expertise, and you're learning from that. So, the way that it all came together is we were doing a lot of order execution for the guys in Tokyo. So you start to get close to them, what they're doing, you understand what they're doing, and you look to see if there's any other ways that you can arbitrage that business a little bit better, because a lot of it was arbitrage, because you've got a lead market in Japan, and then you've got a secondary market in Singapore. So the secondary market is always looking at the lead market, and the prices could be a little bit out of line. So I started to take advantage of some of those for the guys in Tokyo. And, it starts slowly. You're doing small size. And then the lady who was looking after the options book at the time, she's got a fairly big options book that she's trading all of the time. But she's not hedging it because, she's got the delta's changing by a small amount throughout the course of the day, and she can do extra hedges, gamma hedging that they would call it, in order to guard against these smaller movements, and you can make money out of doing that. So she asked me to do some of that for her. So it kind of all comes together, and it's it's not it's not a path that's laid out, but it's you're getting closer to these people. They're getting more confident in you. you've got a better relationship with them, and ultimately, everything during that period is a is a breach of trust. It's a breach of confidence as well. But it's all growing together. But it's not. I don't think I ever sat down, and we did used to have. At the end of the year, you'd have a meeting about what your bonus was going to be, and then they'd set out what you were going to be doing for the following year. Whether any of those actually went the way that they were supposed to, I can't even remember what those are called. What are they called at the end of the year when you get a performance review or one of those sort of things. But part of it was, in the next 12 months you'll be doing this. This was a job that you learnt on your feet, and you were, as the markets aren't the same, from one day to the next. And so the job is always very, very different. It's always developing, it's changing. There's opportunities within it. You've got, derivatives on derivatives, and the products are always changing. So there's always plenty going on. You're just not, I don't think you follow a straightforward career path that you might do in a different industry. But it's performance, and it's, there's a little bit of who there's a lot of what and there was opportunity at that time as well.
Let me try and re-express that for the lay people then. So there's a certain type of weather that Nick is trading in, and he's being successful in this type of weather. And when you get successful in this type of weather, your confidence builds, and the confidence of your colleagues around you trust in you builds. But like he said, the stock market is changeable, and all kinds of weather is lurking out there, ready to come in and destroy everything you have built up. That's what we're getting to, folks, I think.
Yeah, it got a bit stormy.
Let's go over the trades then. I mean, what amount were you initially authorised to trade?
So initially, it's arbitrage, right? So you're buying in one location, you're selling in the other. So theoretically, there is no exposure.
Yeah.
Right. There's a bit of execution risk because, you've got the time between you doing those sort of two things.
You're covered.
But you're covered. And that's the theory behind it. So in terms of, being given a position limit at that time, in the early days, it didn't exist. Later on, I'm authorised to trade 250 lots of Nikkei 225. So notional value of that is probably, £1 million. Something like that. And, so that's the maximum exposure you can have at any one time with that execution risk. I traded many times that number, and the deeper and deeper I'm getting into the situation, the bigger those trades are becoming, the risk that you're taking on, the frenzied sort of nature of it all. It's just taking on a life of its own.
The sun's out now, folks. His colleagues are out bathing with the deck chairs and the cervezas, and
counting their bonus, wondering what car they're going to buy. Whether three houses is being greedy. Yeah, no, there was definitely a bit of that, Sean. Definitely.
So it went from $1 million to what?
In terms of some of the trades,
just let's gradually go over how you were authorised to have more and more.
Well, no, from that point on, it's all unauthorised.
Unauthorised.
It's all unauthorised.
All right. So your cap was $1 million.
Yeah.
And how did you breach that? Then take us through those trades as it got. Because there's a part in the movie where you go, I just lost £50 million in one day. How do we get from what you're saying now to that?
Yeah, that was a good day. There were some worse days than that.
We want the details.
Unbelievable. No, slowly. Obviously the position. So the way that it started off. So as I said to you earlier, the circuit breakers were kicking in Japan. All of this business was then shifting to Singapore because for those who would have been aware of the markets at the time, and Sean will definitely have an analogy to bring to this anyway, but when the circuit breakers kicked in, everybody was putting in sell orders. So they were backing up these sell orders. And that meant that the market didn't open in Japan for that day. So the market had ticked down, and there'd be a limit to how far it could go down, maybe 700 points. So all of the business was in Singapore. So we went from doing 2,000 contracts a day, the whole market, to doing 20,000 contracts a day. So you're writing out your tickets, you're giving your tickets to a runner's going and trying to put that into a computer. The other side of the trade is doing exactly the same, and hopefully in the middle they match. The first thing that happens is the systems can't cope with, or the computers can't cope with the volume. So you've got all of these tickets, they're stacking up, they're not matching, and it's taken until 4 o'clock in the morning to actually match the trades. So, if you were working in London or if you're working in Chicago on one of the exchanges there, you've got to match the trades within 30 minutes, right? That's the rule. That was the rule in Singapore. But because of the volume, the lack of expertise, the lack of experience and poor systems, it was taking, 12 hours to match a trade. So you've got all of this exposure that you're trying to keep control of. And then later on in the evening, and I used to have to do this, I'd go back to the office at, say, 11 o'clock at night and still be trying to match these trades off. And maybe you've got a clearer picture by 2 or 3 in the morning, and one of the girls who was picking up the phone, who shouldn't have been picking up the phone because she didn't have any experience, she placed the order the wrong way, because it's all done with hand signals. So if you want to buy, if you sell, you're going that way, and you use your face and your head for the numbers and the prices that you're trading at. And so we've realised at 3-4 o'clock in the morning she's done the trade the wrong way. There's a 10 grand error, but we've got a position as well, right? Because we've got to make the customer good. So the customer gets the trade that he wanted, but we've got a position because it's wrong. Plus we've made the customer good, so we've got a bigger position. And then the very next morning I go down, I speak to the head of operations in Singapore. So like 7 o'clock in the morning, he's in his office. I just walk in, I explain it to him. He doesn't really understand futures and options. So he asked me to refer it to the head of trading back in London, right? But he's not going to be at his desk for 7 hours. So, and that's a frightening conversation, right? So this is me just starting out in Singapore, trying to make a name for myself. I've got the opportunity that I want, but it's starting to blow up on me. So I've done the right thing to a degree. I've gone and seen Simon Jones, who headed up that department in Singapore. He's told me to refer it to Andrew Bayliss in London, and I've gone back and I've sat at my desk, and the markets are opening up in 15 minutes. And I've got this really scary conversation with Andrew Bayliss. And I think one of the things that we were all very conscious of at the time is that you see and hear things about what's going on within the organisation, and somebody had lost their job because they'd lost a little bit of money, and you're fearful of that, right? So I've now got this period, 15 minutes before the market opens, 7 hours or 6 or 7 hours before Andrew Bayliss is going to be at his desk. And if the market opens up at the right level, nobody's going to know about the error. I don't have to tell London, right? And that's the chance that I took. Markets open, they continue to keep falling. It's getting worse and worse throughout the day. I'm now more complicit. Do I cut that error, which is already worse than it was when I went to see Simon Jones a few hours ago? Or do I take the opportunity that we're going to get back to that level? Yeah, and I made the wrong decisions.
There's smoke coming out of the volcano now, folks.
There is a volcano later in this story.
Yeah.
But so now I'm getting to the end of that day. Simon Jones, he just deflects it, right? He's, refer it to London. He's not bothered about it. That's not interrupting the rest of his day. I haven't told Bayliss, so I've now got a position that's the same size as it was at the beginning of the day, but it's just more loss making. So it goes into the illegal 5/8 account, which is where I hid the losses.
What was the loss at this point?
It's probably gone from $10,000 up to 40 or 50. So it's a fairly, as you described at the beginning with your description, it's escalated quickly. But the thing is, I'm now, as much as I wouldn't have wanted there to be an error earlier that morning and wouldn't wanted to have that block my copybook, it wasn't me that made the error. But now I'm part of it because I've let it run. I know I'm supposed to cut it. I know I'm supposed to refer it up the line, and I've done none of those things. And it's now my error. And it's in the 5/8 account, and I'm concealing it. And hopeful that over the next few days, I'm gonna be able to get this back. Like, I'm expecting a knock on the door every single minute of every single day. Every time the phone rings, I'm shit. Fuck me, what are they going to say now? Right? This is it. Somebody's going to expose what's going on. Because when I worked at Morgan Stanley, this is the sort of stuff that I did. Right? If somebody's like, I'd check positions before 7 o'clock in the morning. If your position didn't agree, the trader wasn't allowed to trade. My positions never agreed, but nobody was asking me those questions. But every time somebody came in the door, I was like, you know, that was it. It was going down at that minute. And you were living completely on your nerves. And that's the way that it went for weeks, you know, completely living on your nerves. And then people aren't asking you the questions. You know, they're not asking you why the position doesn't agree, because the position didn't agree, right? It's that position didn't agree for nearly 3 years.
How many days before it was into a loss of six figures?
I can't give you well, it's not going to be long, right? Is going to be the answer to your question. Because now, not only is that loss getting bigger on that original position, I'm making the position bigger, doubling down, if you like, so that I don't have to go so far to get it back. Yet the market's still going against me. So it's that, you know, it's that gambling mentality, that chasing, if you like. You know, I'm chasing that loss in order to get it back so that I can close that position down and start my life again, right? That's the motivation. That's where I want to get to. But I'm just getting, the markets aren't behaving.
Is this post a bubble in the Japanese stock market and it starts to go down? It doesn't recover, does it?
No.
Okay.
No. So
you're on that curve going down.
100%. Yeah. I mean, when I went out to Singapore, the Nikkei 225, just to give you some numbers, Nikkei 225 was trading around 39,000. When I left Singapore, 2.5 years, 3 years later, it's down at 17,000. And that's a one-way journey, a journey that I'm going in the opposite direction of. And then fairly soon after I left Singapore, you know, the Japanese market went down to about 9.
I remember because
it's back up at 40 now.
When it peaked, it was worth more than the US stock market.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? And the real estate in Japan was just insane.
Yeah.
So how long before there's concealed losses in the millions?
Well, you know, we're talking about a period there that is probably July 1992. And these are the ones I can give you guaranteed numbers off. You know, by September of 1992, the loss is $5 million. And the reason why I know it's $5 million is we've got an audit. So the auditors are coming in. So up until that point, what I was doing, it's always described as a clever or a complex fraud. And it was the most simple thing that you've ever seen. And it was, you know, it was so crude, the stuff that I was doing. It's just unbelievable, you know, when you look back at it. So the only day that the accountant would pick up the balance sheet was the last day of the month. Right, so she wouldn't pick it up on any other day. If you picked it up on any other day, there'd be a huge hole in the balance sheet, which was the loss in the 5/8 account. But she never did that. So there was no quality testing. On the last day of the month, I'd have to give her the balance sheet. And as long as the 5/8 account was 0, she wouldn't be able to interrogate it any further. So it had to be 0 on the last day of the month. So I just used to credit the 5/8 account and debit a commission income account. Bonkers stuff, right? But I did that. So I did that for 3 or 4 months. Then in September of 1992, the auditors are coming in. The commission income account's got no money left, right? Because I've used it all, keeping the loss down in the 5/8 account. So last minute, the auditors are already there, right? They're already doing their preparatory work. And on the 30th of September, I pick up the phone because I've run out of ideas, right? There's no way I can hide this. It's all going to come crashing down now. Got a very professional external outfit who are going to be looking at the books and records. And my goose is cooked, right? This is the end. And you need to work out how you're going to exit this. So very last minute, I picked up the phone, I phoned a guy called Tony Hawes, who was the treasurer of Barings Securities, and I said, I need $5 million, as you do. So he said, what's that for? I said, there's a bit of volatility in the market. The exchange want additional margin. It's the only story I could come up with. And so Tony knew nothing. Tony knew nothing about futures and options, and he sent me the $5 million. But the $5 million, I posted that journal entry, so credit 5/8 account, debit bank. I posted that entry on the 30th of September, 1992, and the money didn't arrive till the 1st of October, 1992, because he was paying it from London. So when the auditors did their year-end audit, they found an intercompany discrepancy of $5 million, but they put it down to a foreign exchange discrepancy. And that's how I survived that first audit and was still going. So it's like all of these things. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just this. I don't know how to. It's like this cosmic gathering of incompetence and negligence. You know, from the external auditors, from the regulators, from the exchange. You know, me, the board of directors, everybody who worked within Barings. You know, I just can't think of anything that hits that level or that scale of incompetence.
Are you in a perennial state of thinking, my doubling down, it's going to come back at some point and I'm going to be clear of this? Or is there a arc of shock, hope, and it's going down so much now, I'm just losing, there's no way?
I think you're always looking for the slightest positive, right? And the problem is you see that slightest positive in such a magnified way that it doesn't.
When you've got that much on the line.
Yeah. It's weird.
When the market opens up down, I can't imagine the feeling in your guts. You must be like, oh.
But you also get this strange confidence as well, Sean, because people aren't asking you the right questions, right? So you've got all these people who are buzzing around, these guys who are, you know, some of them are very qualified in terms of what they're doing, but they're still not asking you the difficult questions, and they're not testing you, they're not tasking you. And so in the back of the thing I think that's keeping me going through that period, as I said to you, you're expecting that knock on the door, it doesn't come. And, you know, then, so I'm not going to get exposed today, right? Maybe I've got a week to turn this around. And this happens slowly, right? It's not straight away. And then you get to the end of the month and the accountant takes the balance sheet and you get past that. And then you do that the next month. So you're slowly growing in confidence. You've got time.
So in terms of the weather analogy then, his colleagues are still out on the deck chairs sunbathing. He's seen the smoke coming out of the volcano, but he's thinking, it's not going to erupt, folks. These volcanoes, the smoke comes out all the time. They never erupt. So it's all good.
And you just keep giving the guys on the beach a few drinks. Get them a couple of extra cocktails, and you know,
and keep them looking that way.
That's it. Yeah, VIP invites to the latest club on the beach, and they're not really. It's a great, and that's kind of what was happening. Yeah, there's a bit of that, and so you start to get this confidence that you've got a bit more time, right? And that's what you're thinking of. You're not. I think you don't really want to focus on the loss because that's the scariest part of it. And you avoid that as much as you can, right? So there's a lot of avoidance going on throughout this period.
Would you say it hit you more in the gut, the initial loss of the tens of thousands, or was it the 5 million, or was it the 50 million, or were any of them disproportionate to you?
I think the first one is the worst.
First one was the worst.
I think the first one is the worst one. Yeah, it's as weird as that sounds. But then you've got, you know, once you've got the auditors there, and then for me that was a hurdle that I was never going to overcome, right? So then somehow you get past it, and but I can't tell anybody, right? Because this is my failure, which is the worst thing for me, the hardest thing to take. So I can't tell my wife at the time, I can't tell my mates back home. Everybody else around me's buying into the success story. As you said, they're all working out what they're going to do with their bonuses and stuff like that. And it's just this tissue of lies that you you continue to propagate in order to move forward. But for me, the hardest thing was to admit I was failing. That's what I couldn't deal with. And, you're left with this balance, and it's a balance that didn't work for me, but do you keep going or do you confront that failure? And I just could never confront the failure. It was always a case of, let's go for another day.
How did it get into the tens of millions, the loss?
Well, and this is the bit that's gonna worry you, and it worries me with hindsight as well. Is so from $5 million at the end of in September 1992, the position's getting bigger. So now, so I've gone from doing that crude journal entry. I've gone through asking the Treasury Department for money, and they gave it far too easily. But then the exchange do something which, whilst it's me doing everything, it kind of it facilitates the next stage, right? So they introduce options on futures, but they made a classic mistake when they did it. That when you sold an option, you received 100% of premium. So on most established, well, pretty much every other market, there are one or two historically where this hasn't been the case, but on every other market, you only receive the profit or the loss. So it's mark to market. But they didn't do that in Singapore. So if you sold an option and you sold an option for 50 million, you would receive $50 million. You would then have to pay a deposit to safeguard or margin that position, but you would receive the $50 million. So I could sell options, and that would go into the 5/8 account, reducing the balance, but then I would need money to fund that position at the exchange. So I don't want to get too technical, or maybe I should, I don't know. But so what happened over that next period is I was selling options to bring the balance down to zero. Position was getting bigger. I was taking on more risk. It was leveraged. That risk was exploding out. It was increasing dynamically as the markets were going down. So all of the things that you described at the beginning. So, at the beginning, maybe I had 1,000 options. By May of 1993, I probably had 50,000 options. It was growing really, really quickly. And then in May of 1993, the most perfect thing happened. The options expired at exactly the level that I needed, and all of the money, all of the loss was taken out. So it had been 20 million, and I made 20 million back in May of 1993.
You were clear?
Clear.
Of everything?
Everything.
Going back to the original mess?
Yep, all gone.
What?
Yeah.
And you didn't think, right, I just need to call it quits now?
Yeah. I don't know why. Would you? I don't like.
You're addicted now to the.
I don't know. It's not a thing I've ever kind of. There's a book. I don't know how many books you want me to quote on here, but there's a book called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. Right, it's written by a guy called John Coates, who used to be a Goldman Sachs trader. He went on to become a professor of neurology, and he talks about the things that happen in your brain when you're trading. The release of the dopamine, the serotonin, and all these sort of things. It's a little bit too clever for me, this book, right? But it is all about what's going on in your brain and the neurological changes that are happening as you're trading. And so I think there's a bit of that. Also, I think for me, what I should have done is I should have left. Should have resigned and gone, and maybe gone to work for another firm and learn off the back of what had happened during that period. But I stayed, went back into the trading floor on the Monday morning. One of the guys made an error, because it wasn't just me making the errors. I was hoovering up everything into this 5/8 account. If one of the order fillers, if they bought or they sold too many, that would go into the 5/8 account, and the whole story started again. Clear on the Friday, party on the Saturday, back in the shit on the Monday.
And how much were you in the shit for?
It would have been small again at the beginning, but then, it was just getting bigger and bigger. The guys in Tokyo then are asking you to do more. futures contracts are 3-month contracts, so you used to have to roll from from March into June, June into September, September into December. So they're asking you to do more of those. You're facilitating that. The more success that you're showing, and this is the opposite of what it should be, but they're less inclined to look and ask questions, and that was what was happening during that period, and they were still on their deck chairs on the beach.
How long before this loss exceeded the previous loss?
It's a good question. I would say that I'd say by the end of 93, so that was May of 93, I'd say by the end of 93, we're getting into close to $100 million.
How does that feel?
You're numb. You're not looking at the numbers. You can't completely divorce yourself from it because you know how much money you're getting from London. So the Treasury Department, because I'm using all of these options to keep the balance zero, the Treasury Department's giving me 100 million to fund this position. So you couldn't do it without the Treasury Department sending you the money. So you're continuing with this story about it being volatile, extra. I've now got a fictitious client who's doing some big options trades that we need to fund for a day. But it's all nonsensical, right? If you sat in a room with 100 logical people and you try to explain this scenario to them, you'd struggle to find 2 or 3 people who would go with you on the story. Yet everybody was going with me on the story.
What about the auditors? Did they send them out again?
They came out once a year, as auditors do. We had an internal audit team. They came through Singapore in 1994, made loads of recommendations. That was great. We sat there in the office as they sat round this board table, and they said, we want you to segregate Nick's duties from the front office and the back office. He's not allowed to do both things, which is rule 101. So we all sat there nodding at them, and then they left, and nobody bothered about it again. It was just, just pure contempt. And, what had happened to me by that stage is because I was surviving, and, now I've gone from surviving for a week to surviving for a month to surviving for 3 months, 4 months, whatever. That's kind of the horizon I've got now on this. Eventually that surviving becomes contempt, right? You just, an auditor comes in, you think, nah, you're not good enough. Or somebody comes in from the settlement side of it, one of the board of directors. Like the easiest thing for me to do when the board of directors was coming in is just take them down to a bar, get them as much drink as they wanted, get them something nice to eat. If they needed anything else, that could be arranged also. But just keep them away from the trading floor. So they'd wake up the next morning, they'd be hungover, they'd be feeling shit. They didn't want to come to a noisy trading floor where everybody's shouting at each other, and they just kept away from it. And it was those just stupid ways that you could keep people away from what was going on. Like I said, really, really crude.
So how soon before it hit $500 million?
That would have been late on. I think by the end of 94, I probably had 400 million from me. The Treasury Department. This is a small bank, Sean. It was only worth £250 million. That was the capital base. So they're borrowing the money. They're borrowing it. Yeah, they're borrowing it from Barclays. They're borrowing it from Citibank to give it to me in Singapore. And they're not asking, and they're not. You used the word earlier, diligence. Was there any diligence done about my trading? Never. They're giving me 400 million. The bank's only worth 250 million. Right, the legal limit you could lend to a subsidiary is 20% of the bank's capital, so 50 million. So the Bank of England are allowing this to happen. All of the regulators around the world are allowing this to happen. It's just getting bigger and bigger. What happened at the end of 94 is I'd given up. Right, I came home that Christmas and I didn't want to go back. Right, but I still couldn't put my hand up. I couldn't enunciate it. I couldn't deal with my own failure, but I wanted out of it, right? But I couldn't do it myself, right? I needed somebody to find out what was going on. Like there were bizarre stuff, right? I used to, sometimes I used to come back to the UK and rather than rather than miss out on making money, Barings would make me go into number 8 Bishopsgate, which is Barings, Baring Brothers offices at the time, and ask me to trade through the night so that they were still making money. And I used to be in 8 Bishopsgate, nobody else in the building, security would have to let me in, and there'd be somebody going around hoovering up on the trading floor around me, right? So that we could continue with this pretense that they were making money and that I was doing something. Wow. You know, perfect opportunity for them to look at the books and records, get behind what was going on, do some diligence. But no, for them it was all about how do we make money. You know, we can't have us not making money for a week. We need Nick in the office working through the night, not really caring about what he does during the day, but we need him there in the evening, making sure that we're making money and that we're taking advantage of all these opportunities. So no due diligence at any time throughout this whole process. But Christmas '94, I didn't want to go back, but still I couldn't tell anybody.
So when did the volcano explode?
Well, the volcano literally exploded in February of 1995. There was... well, no, it wasn't a volcano, it was an earthquake. It was an earthquake in Kobe. And I can't remember exactly what the earthquake is called, but there is a name that's given to it. And that just sent the markets catapulting lower. And so this position is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I've got, I'm long 60,000 futures. I'm short 100,000 options. I am the market, right? I am the market. There is just no way you can unwind this, right? No, it's just impossible. People say, well, could you do this? Could you turn your position? No, it was impossible at that stage. I am half of every single trade in that market. I am half the open interest. And it is just, the market isn't big enough for me to be able to do anything with this. But you just like it. This is going to sound like the most bizarre stuff, but it kind of crept up on me. But it was, and the market makers were meeting in Tokyo, and they were talking about my position. Even the Barings traders were meeting in Tokyo, and they were talking about this position because I was pretending it was another client. So they were all talking about it in Tokyo and what they were going to do to maybe pick volatility up a little bit, make the prices a bit higher and squeeze this person out. So it was me. Do you know what I mean? And these Barings people are attending. We'll have to do the movie again and make it proper, but it's... So
come on, the squeeze comes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Marx Brothers or something, the three Marx Brothers running around.
So go on, how did it come to light?
So in February of 1995, so the audit period has changed, so the auditors are there. They're coming in February 1995, and there's a lot of talk going on about this position. I've made up this story about an OTC transaction called the SLK receivable. There's questions being asked about that. I need to give an audit confirmation of this. So the auditors have given me a pro forma. This is the way that audits used to be done all those years ago. None of the the digital confirmations that you see these days. But so they gave me a confirmation. Send this to SLK. They should have been doing that themselves anyway, and get them to. So it's a cut and paste job. I've cut off an SLK signature to attach to the bottom. I've taken it home to my house in up near Orchard Road, and I faxed it to the auditors. All right. Little did I know at the time that when the auditors received it, it's got from Nick and Lisa on the top of the thingy because it's come from my house, but they didn't twig it. So they've accepted it, and that's how that continued for a little bit longer. Then London were worried now. So I've got 650 million with me in Singapore. Barings have no money. Capital base of the bank's only 250 million. So
the Queen can't withdraw.
I think the Queen had left by then. She was a bit more savvy. So they've bought Barclays and Citibank not lending them any more money. Said your credit's shot. So they went to the stock market and they issued a bond for £100 million in order to keep this going. But they're asking questions, right? People aren't able to make trades in other locations just because all of the money is in Singapore. So they sent somebody over from settlements to have a look around and see what was going on. He was there for about 20 days. And then eventually he did a position reconciliation. The thing you should do, the first minute of every single day, he eventually does after 20 days. He comes to me with the position reconciliation and, huge discrepancy, 100,000 futures, or 60,000 futures, 100,000 options. Can you explain it? I just got to go and take a call. I'll be back in a few minutes. And I go home, pack a bag and gone.
What was your first destination?
Well, Changi Airport, I had a few quid in the safe. There was about 10,000. It wasn't 862 million pounds, but there was a few $1,000s in the safe. So we took that. We went to Changi Airport. I went to see somebody that I knew that worked on the trading floor with me. I told him I need to leave. The shit's going to hit the fan. I don't know how bad it's going to be. I never expected the bank to collapse, right? So I just said, look, I'll phone you tomorrow. I'm just going to get out of the country. I'll phone you tomorrow, maybe meet up in Phuket at the weekend, and you can tell me quite how bad it is because you'll be down on the trading floor and you'll see it all unfolding. So we got to Changi Airport, flew to Kuala Lumpur, which is the only ticket you can get from the airport. So we flew to Kuala Lumpur, checked into a hotel there. I did a resignation letter which said I'm sorry. It didn't go down too well, I imagine. But and the very next morning, I got up, went down to get something in the hotel, and the first person I saw was somebody who worked for Barings in Kuala Lumpur. So I realised I needed to get out of there. The plan was to go to Phuket and meet this guy and just work out quite how bad it was. I knew there was going to be a substantial loss. Had no idea the bank was going to collapse. So we went to the travel agents in Kuala Lumpur, tried to get a flight to Phuket. There were no flights that afternoon to Phuket, but had to get out of Kuala Lumpur. So we ended up in a place called Kota Kinabalu, which is the Malay part of Borneo. Flew there, checked into the Shangri-La Hotel in Kota Kinabalu, went down into the newsagents the next morning, which coincidentally is my birthday, the 25th of February. Picked up the Asian Wall Street Journal, which was the newspaper of choice at the time, and the headline was British Bank Collapses. My immediate thought was, that's great, somebody's in more trouble than me. And then you read it and you realise it is you. You turn on the TV. It's around the time, so this is 1995, Sky TV's really just starting out then, CNBC and all of those, and then you've got Kenneth Clarke, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, walking up and down the House of Commons and berating you in no uncertain times. And then it's all about survival, really. We're in a hotel room in Kota Kinabalu. Do we go back or do we try to get to Australia?
Who's we?
My wife and I. And my wife at the time, because she'd left at the same time as me. Do we try to get to Australia? I had a mooning incident in Singapore where I got my bum out in a bar, which is outraging female decency, in a bar in Singapore. So I spent a night in the cell because I was arrested. So I spent a night and it wasn't good. And I didn't want that to happen to anybody else. So, how do we get back to a Western country where you might be able to mount some form of defence? So, right, you're in Singapore. Do you go to Australia and New Zealand? Or do you try to get back to Europe? So, again, we went to another travel agent. The first flight back to Europe was to Frankfurt, but it went through a really convoluted route. We had to fly to Brunei. We had an 8-hour stopover in Brunei. From Brunei, it went to Bangkok. You had to get off the plane in Bangkok. From Bangkok, it went to Abu Dhabi, and then from Abu Dhabi, it went to Frankfurt. But this story is just getting bigger and bigger throughout the whole episode.
How was your adrenaline at that point?
you're just trying to you're trying to remain incognito and keep yourself away from people, and Interpol are looking for you. I'm in Brunei for 8 hours, and it's a circular airport, so all the boarding gates lead off of it, and there's a TV above every one of the boarding gates, and your picture's on it. You are the developing story, right? And you're trying to get back to Europe using aeroplanes.
Disguising yourself or anything?
You've got the hood up, and maybe it's like 100 degrees outside. I must have looked the biggest dick in the airport, but and then you get on the plane, and it was back in the day where everybody gets a newspaper when they're getting on the plane. But your picture's on it. Doesn't matter if it's a French newspaper, an Italian newspaper, or a Japanese newspaper. A face is a face, isn't it? And it's all about you. So you're sat on the plane like that as well, with the blanket up around you, with your. It's just bizarre. Just bizarre.
So you get to Germany.
Get arrested. They come to the plane to arrest me.
When it lands?
Yeah. So
what was that like?
Again, it's one of those, people, you often get asked, and it's very much a cliche, was that a release or a relief? And I'm just in survival mode, right? It's not that it's a relief. You've now got the next part to deal with. So you've constantly got another form of survival. So whenever people say, was it a relief when you eventually got caught, maybe later on when you're in prison and you're sat down and you're alone with yourself, you kind of get to that stage. But when it's all happening around you and you've got this, complete tornado of things going on around you, you just, how do I survive for the next day?
Did they arrest your poor wife?
They did. The Singaporeans told them that we were travelling on false passports. So that was the reason why we were detained in Frankfurt. Later on, so we were detained for about 24 hours. The Daily Mirror flew over to collect my wife at the time in return for a story. But in the intervening period, they changed my charge to one of false cheating. So, which is equivalent to false accounting, and there was no charge against her. So the idea that we had false passports, I wouldn't have known where you were going to get a false passport from. So we were travelling on our own passports. That was verified by the German authorities, but there was an arrest warrant. They put me on remand in some police station in Frankfurt that evening, and then the following day I went to a place called Höchst, where there was a prison there, and I was there for about 8 months before I was extradited back to Singapore.
What was the living conditions there like?
Germany, yeah, not too bad. You have to get used to that, loss of freedom. I think psychologically and mentally that's the toughest bit to do. I was on suicide watch for a week in one of those wings where everybody was like that. You were let out for an hour a day. There's a few pictures of me walking around a yard. But there was just, it was a tornado of things that were going on. I'd go and see the judge. The judge would refuse or wouldn't allow me to go back to Singapore. They wanted me to run through a case there. I'd have to employ lawyers. I had a UK lawyer, I had a German lawyer, I had a Singaporean lawyer. Eventually, I started to write the book Rogue Trader because that's what paid for my legal fees. But yeah, no, like the German prison compared to a Singaporean one, I had a TV. It was all in German, unfortunately. But they gave me I had a laptop. Yeah, you could apply for it all through the court. So I had a laptop, I had a Game Boy and things like that.
Did you have a cellmate?
No, it was single cell. I think in Germany, because of AIDS and stuff like that at the time, it was all single cells. I think there were one or two doubles in that particular prison, but no, it was all. It was quite a. I'd describe it as a more dangerous place than Singapore, just because it was the breakup of the Balkan states, so Yugoslavia, So there was a lot of gun runners. There was a few Kurds. There was a couple of Italian mafia types. Not too many Germans. There was a guy there called Alan Starkey, who used to be in business with a guy called John Bryan, who was pictured sucking Fergie's toes. So that was a weird one. He was in the cell opposite me.
What was he in for?
I think he was in for some sort of tax evasion in Germany. So he was based in Germany, but his best mate was John Bryan, who was with Fergie for a period of time.
So did you click up with the Brits then, the English speakers? Or?
I think Starkey was the only one, to be honest with you. I don't think there were too many other. I know there was one other English guy. He was he got done for 5 kilos of cocaine or something. But you know, the thing that I found quite interesting with him, and you know, he found absolutely astounding, is when he got all of his court notes and how the case was being put to him. Half of the people that he'd been dealing with for the last 6 months were all undercover, or you know, everybody was informing against each other, and you know, it was quite, it was a bit of an eye opener for me as well in that regard. But I think he probably got 6 or 7 years in prison in Germany.
How did the locals treat you?
Well, there weren't really locals in that prison. Like I said, they were all foreign. I got on quite well with everybody. There was a guy from Bolivia who was quite a significant figure in the drug world at the time. You know, you use the system, or maybe you don't use the system at first, but you learn to use the system. So you want time out of your cell, you'll go to a church service or something. Not that I'm religious, and I think, you know, in terms of the way that religion is preached in prison, you're preaching to people at their lowest. I think it's the worst thing you can do. But that wasn't the reason. You got an hour out. You got a bit of social time with some of the others. So you know, I got on well with that Bolivian. As I said to you, I was really socially adept. So, you know, you give people, you take everybody on their merits. You know, the Italian guys were one of them was young and one of them was a little bit older. His name was Salvatore, and he used, every Sunday he used to come down in this big, it was the only time that you really wore your own clothes, and he'd come down in this big sheepskin jacket smoking big cigars. Obviously thought he was the big cheese at the time.
What about the food? Sauerkraut?
No, what was it? I don't really remember the food. It wasn't too bad. You know, a lot of pasta, like cold pasta dishes that they could make up easy. They used to bring it round. There wasn't like there wasn't a place that you went to eat. They used to bring it round door by door, so that they'd deliver your food there. Yeah, and I think the one thing about prison and food for me was, you quickly realise you're not eating to enjoy. You're eating to survive. So as long as you can get that into your head, you know, you'll eat whatever it is, because you need to keep yourself strong. And Singapore was the same. I mean, food in Singapore, you get three slices of bread in the morning, and a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. The coffee was absolutely diabolical. You've never tasted anything as bad as this. The tea was okay. But you'd get the 3 pieces of bread, and then at lunch it would be, you know, a piece of chicken or a piece of fish, which would have like 5,000 bones in it. It was horrible, and a bowl of rice. But because I'm, you know, come from a Western diet, you can't eat rice twice a day. It's only over time that you can start to do that. So, you know, again, in terms of playing the system, you know, I'd swap my rice for bread in the morning. I'd eat that in the evening. But then, you know, the vegetarian diet was quite good, you know, tofu and rice, and you got better vegetables and stuff like that. So I applied to get the vegetarian. The governor allowed me to do that, and it was good for a period. And then everybody was applying for it because they all saw what you were getting, and then it goes downhill again. So
yeah, we had the Jewish diet was the best. The kosher food. So you got all these neo-Nazi Aryan Brotherhood guys with Hitler all over them. Yeah. Converted to Judaism. There's Mexican mafia Jews, Italian mafia Jews. It's crazy.
You have to use the system, don't you?
Can you explain how you went from Germany to Singapore?
In how I got there?
Yeah, like what was the court process that enabled you to get moved?
I don't actually think there was a court process that I attended. Like I had the Serious Fraud Office come and visit me in Germany.
Yeah.
So they were there for 2 weeks and asking me whether I'd plead guilty to this, plead guilty to that. And of course I said I would because I wanted to get back to the UK. So they eventually went back to England and decided that the appropriate place for me to be tried was Singapore. This was around the time that the Maxwell brothers were on trial. So there was a cracked trial and they were allowed to walk free. I think the cost of that case is supposed to have been about 50 to 55 million pound. So we think, and there's no proof of this, but we think that there was a fear that there would be another cracked trial if there was a jury. There's no jury in Singapore, so it's just one judge. And so eventually I think we probably agreed to the extradition, but there were various conditions. So I had to make an apology to the Singaporean people. I had to pay something, I think it was £250,000 to the Singaporean police. And in return, the maximum sentence that I was facing was 8 years. So psychologically, I'm having to get to terms that, that's 5 years, 4 months or whatever it is. Am I going to be able to do that? Because the thing that up until that point, you're always getting the speculation in the red tab media. I was facing 12 years of cheating. Each charge of cheating gets 7 years. So if you picked up the Sun, I was going to jail for 84 years. So that grey area is just the thing that I couldn't deal with. Black and white, maximum of 8 years. I can start to come to terms with that. So I don't think there was a court. There's obviously some sort of documentation that's done, but we agreed to go back. So the Singaporeans came and picked me up from. So my lawyer was on the flight back with me. All of the world's media were on the flight as well. So the only advantage of that flight is that because the world's media were on it, they put me in business class. So I flew back to Singapore business class on that last trip.
Did they get to snap you?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's videos of me going through the airport with these two police guys. It was almost like Singapore had won the World Cup when I was going through the airport because they had all these barricades up and there was loads of people, and and they were taking me out into a police car. It was obviously a show, so they were taking me into a police car that was at the arrival part of the airport type of thing, and then there was pictures of me being taken away from there. But for those people who maybe have seen that footage of me coming through the airport, I've got a smile on my face. And it's not because I'm looking forward to what's going on, but you've got this crowd of people, and there was one guy, the guy who I went to see before I left Singapore, just to say I'll meet you in Phuket. He was at the back of the crowd and he was jumping up and down doing star jumps, and he's the only person I could see, and I was just like, oh no, will you go away? And then he was at the courthouse the next day, and
so you got sentenced?
Yep, 6.5 years.
And then how much of that did you calculate remained to be served, taking off your back time, or did you not get back time?
You do get back time. That was part of the agreement before I went. So there's a standard 1/3 remission. So I think the only way I was fearful of calculating it, but I think it was 1,400 days or something that I needed to do in Singapore.
And was it intimidating going into the Singapore?
I think the fact that I'd been through Germany was a stepping stone. I certainly didn't realise quite how tough Singapore was going to be. I've gone from having a bed, a TV, a Game Boy, a bit of exercise, and fairly decent food, to something that's completely different. You sleep on the floor. The floor's very rough. The floor's rough and uneven.
Got a little skinny mattress or anything?
No, it's a rough, screed floor, not very well finished, lots of little bits sticking up. And
are there people around you when you're trying to sleep?
Yeah.
How many? 2 others. So it's 6 foot by 9. So you get 3 people in a cell. So it's cosy, to say the least. Were any of them snorers?
Well, It was more that the way that it worked for me, because they didn't want me getting too friendly with anybody. They didn't want me. I don't know. They certainly didn't want me getting into any form of trouble or violence. So they'd always put two people in from different triad gangs. So there'd be one from Ang Soon Tong, might be one from the 14K triad gang, or Omega, which is a Malay gang. So they immediately would distrust each other, and then they'd have to feed back to their gang members during the day. So there was always it was always edgy, and pretty much every month without fail it'd kick off, and so there'd be a bit of a punch up in the cell. The guards would come, they'd take those two guys out, give me two more guys, and that process went on for a little bit. And then,
I mean, in a small area like that, if there's a punch up, how did you get out of the way?
everybody was involved. Yeah, but I'm bigger than most of them anyway.
You
So
participated in the punch up.
yeah, well, you had if they came close. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you've got no. But I used to box. I used to kickbox when I worked in the city.
Great.
So
Great.
and I'm bigger than most of them as well. So it wasn't. You weren't fearful in that regard.
You're swatting them away. Get back to your triad gang
Yeah,
warfare.
but there's no weapons. There's no weapons in there. I mean, you did see people. I've seen people stab each other with a pen. With a biro like you've got there. And
What was the argument over for that?
it would have all been in Chinese,
Oh,
so you wouldn't necessarily have known. I learnt the Chinese swear words. That was about it. So you knew if somebody was insulting you, and you could, you had to give it back, because that's the whole sort of face concept of it.
Were you esteemed because of the magnitude of your crime?
Well, that's where it got, again, socially adept, and I used to get on better with the Malay and the Indian inmates than the Chinese. The Chinese people in the Singaporean prisons were, bar one or two exceptions, were less educated. They spoke in Chinese more of the time, whereas the Malay and the Indian would have better English. But yeah, no, look, everybody believed that I was this uber criminal that stole $2 billion or whatever the number was. And so, I was elevated to a level that was probably above anybody there. Do you know what I mean? And that kept me safe as well, because, if you've got a triad gang, it's like the army. You've got generals who are the decision makers, and then down the bottom you've got the fighters who they just say, you hit him type of thing, and that gets done. So I was kind of at a level that I didn't go around telling people, no, I fucked up with a few trades. But
Could that work against you though, whereby they think, hey, here's a guy who's got money, let's sweat him?
as long as you're not too naive about that sort of stuff. I mean, I was running around the yard, so you let out for an hour. You don't have shoes or anything, but it's a basketball court. That's the size of the exercise yard. I used to run around it for an hour just to try and tire myself out, so that when I went back to the cell, I'd sleep. But you'd burn the soles of your feet because it was 100 degrees all the time. And then I was running around one day, and there was a Malay inmate. His name was Dayat, and he was one of the bodybuilders who used to go and do a few push-ups before he went to work every morning, and when he came back at lunchtime, that was his kind of thing, and he'd always been seen there. But he was one of the bigger lads, and I was running around, and he stepped in front of me, and I let it go the first time, so I carried on running around, and he did it again, and so we just had it off for 30 seconds. That's how long a fight lasts in there. The riot commandos come in with their gear on, big sticks. You got to lie on the floor. You got to put your hands on your head, and if you don't, they're gonna hit you with the sticks. Then I had a couple of cellmates that I was getting on okay with. They came in, they changed those. I refused to go back in the cell, so they sent me to the punishment cells.
What was that like?
Yeah, it's another degree of toughness, but I was there for 30 days. You normally, if it's a minor offence, you're there for 3 days. If it's a major offence, you're there for 6 days or 7 days. You have to go and see the governor, and he adjudicates. I never saw the governor. I was left there for 30 days.
Any insects or rodents?
Oh yeah, it's well, not so many insects. Yeah, you'd often wake up with a cockroach next to you, but they weren't really cleaned, these cells. They're passed down from inmate to inmate without any any cleaning going on. So there were no windows. So they turned the light on at night and they turned it off during the day. There was no way, you didn't know how time was passing. You used to get your food through a cat flap in the door. So you just get your food thrown through there. In the morning they used to have to count the inmates, so you knew that was about 8 o'clock. That's when that happened. In the evening at 7 o'clock they used to go around and do a muster as well. So you kind of knew 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock at night. The rest of it was just a day. So what I used to do is so it's 6 foot in length. I just used to walk up and down, and 850 times was an hour. And that's, I used to sing to myself, like crazy stuff. I think I didn't sing. And then after 30 days, one of the guards are also triad members. So one of the guards who I knew reasonably well, after 30 odd days, he came and he said to me, you've got to go back to the general area. And I knew they wanted an apology. And I said, I'm not apologising. And he said, no, you've got to go back to the general area. It's not an apology. You've got to go back. So I'd lost a bit of weight. Eyes were bloodshot. And, I was having a bit of stomach pain. So I went back to the general area, and friends had tried to visit during this period who lived in Singapore, and they wouldn't let them in. So eventually I got back to the general area, and then they said, you've got to go for a visit. And it was the British Vice Consul.
Wow.
So that's why they let me out. And then she obviously saw how bad I was, and she came back every month for the next 17 months of my sentence. And it was very shortly after that I was diagnosed as having colon cancer. So I then had that to deal with. So that kind of took over as well.
What about going to the toilet? Is there privacy or?
No. You've got so the cell is 6 foot by 9, probably a tiny little bit bigger than that. But you have you've got a little wall area about this height. So about, what's that, 2.5 foot off of the floor that you squat behind to go to the toilet. It's a hole in the floor. You are supposed to have a shower every day, but the water doesn't normally last. So they used to come round at 7 o'clock in the morning, turn the water on, come back at 8 o'clock in the morning, turn it off. It's a wire mesh behind the cell, and you'd see them coming and doing it. And if there was no water, what you used to have to do was to take a plastic a plastic bag, blow it up, stuff it into the toilet, clean it with a toothbrush. So you clean the area that was the urinal, clean it out as best you could with an old toothbrush, plug the plastic bag, and then start flushing it and collecting the water. But it smelt bad.
What about toilet paper?
You got one roll of toilet paper a month, but a month, yeah. But you don't use it for that. You use it to clean they used to give you these little white spoons, like sometimes you see in the Chinese restaurants when you're having your chicken and sweet corn soup. You used to get one. That's the best way to describe it. You used to get one of those, and it was a plastic. But because all of the food was quite oily, it'd all be left on the spoon. So you actually used the toilet paper to clean your spoon, and then you use your hand to clean your bum. Because that's what
What about the day of your release?
The day of my release? So I was released on the 3rd of July 1999, so a day before Independence Day in the US. You're supposed to be released at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd kept a diary for the previous 3.5 years. It was my way of being able to deal with some of the things that I was experiencing. So there wasn't really anybody to talk to. So I used to write down what I was thinking about and think about ways that I would have preferred to be. I used to draw pictures. I can't draw, but I used to try and do it. But it was just a way of keeping something that you could read back over during that particular period. So they didn't let me go at 8 o'clock in the morning. I had a flight that evening at midnight or around about midnight. So they kept me there for the whole day, put me in a different cell closer to the visiting area, and made me shred all of the books, all of the things that I'd kept over the previous period.
Heartbreaking.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, I just wanted to get through that day. Like that last month is brutal, when you're getting close. you know, as slow as the time had been going up until that point, that last month was just, unbelievable.
All right, so you're deported,
Yep.
and are you armed guards on the plane with you?
No, I'm in business class again.
What? How'd you angle that?
I think we paid for it. I don't know. No, there were a couple of... that's not entirely true. So there were a few... We were in business class. My lawyer was with me. You know, they obviously took us to the gate, and they kept us in a room close to the gate so that we were the last ones onto the flight. Press everywhere, press on the flight as well. So most of the press were down in economy again. There were a couple of guys in business class who were trying to get quotes and stuff during the time, but my lawyer was with me, and he kind of stiff-armed them throughout that process. You know, we had to talk. I was going back to the UK. I was going to be met by the liquidators. They wanted to serve me with an injunction, so we were talking about how much the injunction should be for. Like, it was nonsensical for me. I didn't steal any money, so they made it for £100 million. So we went through the process of what was going to happen. My lawyer had sold a newspaper deal to the Daily Mail. So he was going through the process of what we were going to do when we got back to Heathrow. I was going to come off the plane. I was going to be taken to a room in the Hilton Hotel where the liquidators were going to hand me the injunction. I was going to have to sign that. Then we'd come out of this room in the Hilton Hotel. We'd go down to a room in the Hilton Hotel. I would deliver a prepared speech that had been written whilst we were on the flight. And then I would exit through the door to my left, where there would be a driver from the Daily Mail whose name would be Roger, who would take me to a house in East Sussex somewhere. And that was all orchestrated because the press were all there listening to me deliver this speech. And then my lawyer was taking a few questions, and I just got up and left, got in this car, and was down in Sussex for a week before anybody saw me again.
What about your wife?
We're divorced by that stage.
Oh, it's a shame, as often happens, and the consequences of our crimes fall on family members.
Yeah, and you know, throughout, I think the thing for me, and the thing that, and this is on various different levels, I think the thing that for me was hardest afterwards was realising how difficult it was for other people. So that goes from Peter Norris, who was the CIO of Barings, who was front and centre when, you know, the media were baying for people, and he had to deal with that. And I did a radio programme with him years later, and I witnessed firsthand the pain and the difficulty that he went through, and you can only be you can only be sad and be remorseful over that. You know, my dad was doorstepped one time by the Daily Mirror, I think it was. He didn't really understand what was going on, so he had a bit of a punch up with the reporter from the Mirror. But they all had to deal with it, and it's, you know, like, it's tough, it's embarrassing, it's, you know, difficult to deal with, and, you know, I'm sat in a cell in Germany and I'm avoiding it all.
How did the book get to the movie level? Rogue Trader, if you've not seen it, folks.
Yeah. So how did the book get to the movie level? It's a slightly strange story, but I'll give you the honest version of it. So David Frost, the well-known interviewer, came to visit me in prison in Germany. He wanted to do an interview with me. We were getting various offers from, you know, all of the big American channels as well. And my lawyer decided that we would do this one with Sir David. And so it was for Breakfast with Frost on BBC. The BBC obviously don't pay people or they don't pay criminals.
Criminals, yeah.
So the way that they got around that is that Sir David gave my my wife at the time £15,000 to do this interview, but the paperwork put it down as David Paradigm Productions paying £15,000 for an option on the movie. So nobody expected the movie to be made. It just wasn't a thing. right? The book was being done because the book needed to be done to pay legal fees. But nobody ever expected there to be a movie. And then obviously I went back to Singapore. Again, no real talk of a movie. And then it starts to come through the papers about a year or so later that there is a chance that this movie is going to be made. Ewan McGregor is going to pay me. And, I think Sir David and Ewan knew each other quite well. So, there was a lot of that going on in the background. And, the movie came out a year before I did.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So the movie was
that
released.
A boost for you, though, psychologically, that you had
I don't know.
this career ahead of you now.
No, I didn't even understand that, really. It was, I think what happened in that period is, you kind of like celebrity, notoriety, people making money out of who they were kind of was happening around that time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of it. I came out of prison, came back to the UK, didn't really have a long-term opinion of what I was going to be doing. Somebody asked me to do an after dinner. I did that, tried to be too funny, don't think it went particularly well, but got invited back to do a few more. And I've been doing that for the last, 25 years, 26 years.
So what's your job title now?
I'll do anything.
Except for gamble, the Queen and George Soros's millions.
Yeah. What do they put on those LinkedIn things? Open to work. Yeah, I don't know what my job. Look, I do a lot of after dinner. I do a lot of keynote addresses. I'm off to Cape Town later this month. I've got one in Macau the month after. Big thing in Belgium. So yeah, I've got this notoriety that extends much further than you imagine.
And is your book still in print, and will you make money if people buy it? Because people watching this, some of them are not familiar.
Yeah.
Later generations might want to check that out.
The book is still in print. There is an e-book as well. I think I make about 18p a book, something like that.
There's an audio book.
There is an audio book. They're both still owned by Little Brown. I did extend. The book's been in print. So the book came out in 1995. So the book's been in print for 30 years now.
So they've made a lot of money off your story since then.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I do get a royalty check every 6 months or so. It's not big. It's hundreds rather than what it should be.
But now you're going to move into the podcasting arena.
Yeah. It's something I've always been interested in. I would have described myself as quite introvert when I worked within the banks, kept myself to myself, and I've learned how to communicate, and I think the interesting thing about it will be that a lot of people are very rehearsed and plastic about the way that they approach certain things, unlike yourself as well, where you're trying to get into the detail of what happened. You've experienced some of it yourself as well, if not a lot of it yourself, and it's about getting under the bonnet of what really went on and understanding the people, the psychology of it. So my genre, if you like, is financial scandal. I do a lot of work with people who've been scammed as well at the moment. So, that's an interesting area. I think, the thing for me when I look back at my life, and there've been some difficult periods, let's admit it, I've always done things that I enjoy and want to do. And I think, something like this and something that similar to what you've built up over the years in a different area is definitely of interest to me. I still want to be successful, right? And, there's different... I'm not going to work for a bank ever again. So I've knocked that one on the head. So, I think it's something that I'm looking forward to doing, interviewing some good and interesting people. But, if we're talking about insider trading or rogue trading or whatever else, and somebody gives me a fairly BS answer about something, I'll say, look, come on, I've done it myself type of thing. It's not like that at all. This is the way it was with me, tell us the truth.
Yeah, there are so many parallels in our lives, but I've never had the privilege to say, I lost £50 million. in one day. Watch the movie, folks. Rogue Trader, get the book, and more importantly, support Nick now on his new journey into the realm of podcasting. All of his links are in the description box below this video. Please go down and subscribe, watch what he's doing. And is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers who've been on this 2-hour journey with us today?
Just thank you very much for listening. It's, please subscribe, as Sean says, and it's been an honour to speak to you today, Sean.
Yeah, give me a hug, big man. Well done. Nice one. Yeah, nailed it. That was brilliant. I had the giggles for half of it.